So, Christine, I want to thank you for being a part of the Pro Speaking Summit. And the reason why I thought you being on the summit is important is because speakers do a lot of talking, but you've mastered listening. And I thought that that would be a great kind of pattern interrupt for this type of event because everybody's coming on saying, this is how you talk, and here's how you do your speech. Here's how you get to talk more by getting booked more. But you say, no, no, no. You should, shh. You got two ears, one mouth. You should listen. So you're going to teach us how listening can improve our speaking. So can you give us a little bit of your origin story? Every superhero has an origin story.
Oh,
So
a superhero.
how did you become listening woman?
Well, that's a nice thing to say. I'll take that. I will say I think I'm a superhero in this realm only. So, or maybe a superpower. Yeah, I appreciate the question. So it dates back to my very early life. I can remember as early as 5 listening differently. And it really stems from my mother primarily. There's more to it, but basically she's the thread. And the longer story is that she lost her mother had rheumatic fever as a child, and her heart was weak and wasn't really supposed to have children. And she went against that medical advice. They said, you will not survive the pregnancy and the birth. And that's in fact what happened. So my mother had this pain that was very much underneath the surface from being motherless and being the cause of her mother's death. And when she tried to communicate that to people, it was very hard for them to wrap their minds around and hearts around that because what they saw on the surface was this very charismatic, funny, loving woman, and they couldn't see the dichotomy or really understand it. And they tried to talk her out of her pain a lot. And my job was really to understand that pain and listen to it in a different way. So I saw what went on below the surface, and I also saw the costs that she suffered from people not understanding her. And so that's really where it began in terms of my understanding of how powerful listening and understanding can be. And to jump forward, just to kind of head off at the past in terms of speakers, our job is really to understand our audience first before we have anything to say. What does the audience understand? What do they need? What will help them? And so as speakers, I think it's so important that we get at that core before we start saying anything.
No, that's really, really, really interesting because when I think even from the beginning stage of a speaking or securing a speaking gig, we want to pitch. And I always tell the speakers, I say, hey, why don't you just go for the meeting? Don't try to pitch yourself and give all your credentials. What have you seen as some of the obvious things that speakers do that could be easily corrected? Because there's some more difficult things that probably take work. But what are some of the easy things that we can do as people?
Well, understanding isn't easy. And here's why. Because we're not taught how to do it. We're not taught how to listen. We're not taught how to go in and seek to understand before we start to tell. This dates back to Roman times, ancient history. We've been focused as orators for our entire history as humans. How can we be better speakers? How can we be better persuaders? How can we say things better? And that's what we're doing as speakers. We're trying to compel audiences to our point of view, and yet we're missing the link of how to really understand what the audience needs before we start speaking. So it's just habit. So the first thing I would say is you got to earn the right to tell them both in a meeting and or on the stage to tell the audience what they want to hear. That's true for sales, that's true for our kids, that's true for our spouses. So it's universal, but I think it's a slowdown. We have to slow down to understand before we start telling, advising, and we need to earn the right to do that. And earning the right means understanding. Understanding earns you the right to tell people what they need to hear, want to hear, should hear, but we tend to jump the gun a little bit.
So, how does someone start that process? Because if someone brings me in to speak and they say, Ron, we want you to talk at our conference next month. When they say that, what should I do? Should I say, okay, I'm going to do it? Or should I say, well, hey, tell me who's going to be there? Where should I, when I get that invite, what do I do?
Yeah, so the first question might be, great, I'd love to speak. So you find that commonality. You don't want to just say, maybe I'm not the right fit, but you say, what are why did you choose me? What is it about that you were looking for or that touched for why you're interested in me? Start to get their story about why did they pick you. Maybe it's because they heard you gave a magnificent speech somewhere else. Maybe it's because they liked your topic. Chances are there's something that resonated. And so you want to understand that and so that you can start to understand the audience. And your first audience is the person that's booking you. What are their goals? What are their needs? What do they want to be take away from this event? What do they want their people to take away? If you're tapping into that, you're connecting in a different way so you can deliver what's going to matter to them. Even if you already know it, by the way, or think you know it.
So someone told me, I used to be a financial advisor, and they said, Ron, you ask great questions, but you're not a good listener. And that really stuck out to me. And it was true because questioning and listening aren't the same things, right? Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between the two?
So let me talk about active listening because that's, I think, the gold standard or has been the gold standard in listening, and it's really hard to do. So active listening, one of the things, and what the perception of good listening is to ask really good questions, to be curious. The problem is questions can also interfere with listening because they take the speaker off what I call the main path to what their story is, or the main path to the understanding. So the questions can actually shape the story, feel very diagnostic and prescriptive, and people can feel a level of interrogation when they're being questioned rather than drawing things through curiosity. So questions are part of it, but we have to control the beast. And active listening focuses a lot on how you ask these really compelling questions, and it doesn't necessarily get you to the story any faster.
So what's active listening? I mean, like,
Yeah,
I know
okay,
what
all
hearing
right.
is. Like, I mean,
Uh,
hearing is, I hear all the time. I can't close my ears, right? I can close my mouth. I
hmm
can't close my ears. I
yeah.
hear stuff, but that don't mean I'm listening to it. So what is active listening? Because I don't know what that is.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. So I'm glad you brought up hearing too, because I equate that to going out in the middle of the ocean in a rowboat with one oar and expecting to catch a fish. It's just not adequate. Yet we're told to listen, not taught. So listening is treated like you have working legs, you'll learn to walk. You have working ears, you'll learn to listen, because we rely on the sense of hearing. But the sense of hearing is there's a term I call it listening blindness. We're blind to the meaning or the message because we're only relying on our hearing. So people are colorblind. 250 million people are colorblind, believe it or not. And we think they can see color because we can't tell. And it's the same with hearing. We don't know what we're missing because we don't, it's ubiquitous. We can't see it. So hearing is what we're relying on, and we're failing. 17% of what is said is what we retain. So it's not good. So I appreciate you saying that. Active listening is the next level. I'm going to show you I'm paying attention so that I can figure out the meaning. I'm going to give you my thoughtful attention. These are the 5 best practices of listeners. I'm going to give you my attention. I'm going to show you I'm paying attention. I'm going to ask really good questions and be curious. I'm going to empathize with you. I'm going to reflect what you say. All right. And I'm going to look at you. I'm going to make eye contact. These are the 5 principles. I often say, okay, go ahead, go do it now. How easy is that, right? Oh, I just have to ask good questions. I have to reflect what's said. I have to pay attention to you. It's overwhelming. It tells you what to do, but not how to do it. And the how is and the what is kind of hard to put your arms around. So that's the baseline that we're operating from. And the greatest enemy of listening is our brains, is our subconscious brain. So we're trying to white knuckle this superpower, this thing that's going on in our heads that we can't control in order to pay attention. And it's not working. It's not working because it's too strong. The subconscious brain is too strong. So often what I say is we say things and we assume people understand what we heard, but I just told you that 17% of what is said is not retained, and you don't hear much of what's because the brain's in the way. So if we don't ever pause and check in then we don't know if we're really walking the same path. Are you over here or are you over here? So that's the part of listening that also matters, is that we have to slow down enough to check in with the person that we're in a dialogue with so it doesn't become a monologue.
So is that the job of the person talking or the job of the listener to say, hey, can you stop and let me reflect?
I'm so glad you asked that question. I will say, I don't know if you're going to listen to my answer based on the previous story you just told me, but that is an amazing question. And here's why. Most of us are relying on the speaker to be good at telling us what they need to tell us. And in fact, as people and as a society, as much emphasis has been on speaking, and in the last 12 years on storytelling, most people are terrible storytellers. Terrible. It's just like telling a joke. Have you ever had friends say, "Oh, let me tell you a joke," right? Oh, two men walk into a bar and blah, blah. Oh, wait, hold on. That's not how it started. That's not how it started, right? But when we're speaking, we're doing the same thing. We just don't know that we're horrible storytellers. And when you're listening, you're always listening to a story. So you just gave me an example early on. You said, someone calls me and says, Ron, I want to book you for a speech. And you go, all right, you're in the middle of a story. You just didn't know it, but that's a story. It just started with one sentence. So you had your job as the listener. If we move from what I call active listening to what I'd like to have the world see is a different kind of listening, which is I'm now going to be the guide as the listener. The listener's in charge, not the speaker. The listener's in charge. I'm going to guide you on the path so that you can tell me your story in a way that I can reach an understanding. But it's my job to guide you, not to let the speakers aimlessly walk the path, get lost on all these side trails, and you're totally confused. So that's the metaphoric change in terms of how we listen to understand. The listener is the one that's guiding the speaker so they stay step in step.
Okay. So I'm listening to what someone is saying, but in my brain, I'm thinking of what I'm going to say back.
Yeah,
Like I'm responding, and it's like I've already responded, but I missed like 10 words while I was thinking about my response. Shoot! How do
right.
I
So
overcome that
that's
listening to
right. And
respond type of thing?
well, let's talk about the inhibitors to listening because that's what you're mentioning here. So I said the greatest enemy of listening is our brains. What did you think when I said that? What came to your mind when I said the brain's our greatest enemy?
But without my brain, I can't understand what you're saying. So it's
Okay,
like it's a double-edged sword. My ears are connected directly to my brain.
that's right. It is a double. That's so well said. It's a double-edged sword. So your conscious brain. So if neuroscientists depict the brain like an iceberg in the water. So your conscious brain is above the water, and just like an iceberg, that's the smallest part of your brain, and that's the one we're in control of. That's the part of you that says, "I want to listen." Okay. Then your subconscious brain, which is our limbic brain, our emotional brain, is below the water. That's a huge beast, a superpower, and it's telling you to do everything except listen. It's saying, don't listen. I have a question. I have a response. I have to think about my answer. So there's a bunch of listening inhibitors that the subconscious brain is interfering with that ability. And one of them is rehearsing. What am I going to say in response to what Christine just said? That's one of the major listening inhibitors. Another one is problem solving. I want to advise or problem solve when I hear what's going on. Oh, I have, so a customer comes in or you want a speech. I have that solution. Let me start telling you about that solution. So we jump to that. That's an inhibitor. And so these are the things that the brain's telling us to do that so it interferes. The way we've handled listening so far, because there's 0 years of education on listening in our school systems, is to let the person figure it out on their own. Just good luck, have at it. I hope you have a good time listening and your brain's going wild. So the metaphor that I've created is you wouldn't go hiking in the woods backpacking for 2 days, let alone 2 weeks, without tools or supplies in your backpack. And we go into the conversational woods all the time without any tools or supplies, expecting to control that beast, that superpower. So you need tools to listen to understand.
So, okay. So my brain is a double-edged sword.
Hmm.
There's this iceberg where I'm only getting like 5% of what's being said.
Yep. Well done. Yep. You're doing good, Ron. I love this.
I'm in
Yeah.
trouble.
So it feels like that because you haven't been shown how. Okay. So that's why it feels that way. But you can't solve a problem you don't know you have. So that's why what you're going through now, the realization of I'm stuck. Most of the time, we don't know we're stuck. We think we're listening because we rely on our good intentions, and that's what we think we got it, and we don't check in, and we're not sure. So the first problem is that we don't know we have a problem because what we think the problem is this. We think that technology, especially in this fast-paced world, and it is an interference, but it's not the root cause. The problem that most of us think about is we're distracted, we're busy, there's too much going on, I'm bombarded, I feel overwhelmed, and it's that's a lot of what people are attributing to the listening problem these days, when in fact it's because we've been trained to speak. So it's just like an athlete. If you train yourself to use your quad, you're not going to use your hamstring. It's weaker. So we're going to what our strength is, which is we've practiced speaking, we've practiced problem solving. We haven't practiced how to control the superpower, our subconscious brain, so that we can listen differently.
That's interesting because in business and in work, people come to us a lot to have problems solved, right?
Yep.
So if you're someone sends me a question, they want an answer, right?
Yep.
And if you're training that for 8 hours a day, when you get outside of the business setting, you didn't turn that off. That's you've been doing this for 8 hours a day. So
Yep.
those extra 4 hours you're with your family, your kid asked you a question, you solved the problem. He didn't want the answer, probably.
That's
Your
right.
girlfriend asked you a question, or your wife or husband asked you a question, and you're still in problem solving mode. And you're like,
Yep.
oh, wait a minute. One thing I figured out, and this may not be good, but it works.
Okay. Okay.
Right? So, my partner, her first language is Spanish. Her only language is Spanish. Okay? My Spanish is my half language. It's not even a second language. Right? But we've been together for 5 years, and how it's worked is I never respond when I want to because I can't. And my disability in Spanish requires me to take what she's written to me, translate it, think about it. So I can't, that brain thing doesn't get in the way because it's a bunch of noise.
It forces you to understand. This is such a great example. It forces you to understand the language before you can create a response. So, so I'll go back to my education background. So I have a master's in psychology in the education division, and I took an elective. It was a linguistics course, best course I ever took, because we assume language. Like if I say alcoholism, you and I mean the same thing. We think the same thing when we, but there's depending on who you ask and their experience around alcohol, that definition is very different at what makes someone be an alcoholic or have alcoholism. We navigate life as if the words we say mean the same thing to each other. And so that's the first problem. You also described problem solving. My dad was a financial planner, by the way. So he started his career as a chicken feed salesman and parlayed that into an opportunity to sell insurance when they actually really trained you not how to be just a rep, but also how to do the people side of it. And he used to say, you have to understand your clients, every intimate need they have, not just their immediate family, their cousins, their aunts, their uncle, the whole thing, because you can't help them unless you really understand all that. So it's such an important part of it. So when we go into conversations, we tend to think we already know the problem. He used to say, don't we all solve the same problems, 5 problems time, every day? We're seeing, so the knowledge and experience is also an enemy of listening. The more you know, the more you've seen that movie before, the more you know how to overcome the struggle to help them come to a resolution. So we don't tend to go back to the beginning and understand the root cause of the problem before we start solving. And that's true at our home lives, and in our business lives. And customers, as well as our spouses, our partners, and our children, even if it's the 50th time you've seen that problem and you know how to solve it, it's like a Broadway show. They want to feel like they're seeing it for the first time and you're seeing it for the first time. Not that, I've already been there, I know the answer. They want you to experience the show with them as if you've never seen it before. So we have to always remind ourselves to take a fresh perspective, like we don't know the language to deeply understand before we start jumping in.
How do we deal with when someone says something, but it's not the real thing? I'll give you a great example. I was talking to someone and they said, "Oh yeah, you know, I tried this and it didn't work."
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
And my immediate response was, "Oh, okay. Well, did you look at this other thing?" It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't to ask, "Well, tell me more about it," right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if they tell me more, I can find out if they actually tried it or not, or if they're just posturing, or they
Right.
didn't do it right. There's so many things underneath that "I tried this and it didn't work" question.
Yep.
How do we deal with that to make sure that when we respond, we're actually getting to the root of what the person is talking about, like the center of the onion or the center of the
Yep.
orange, instead of just chewing on the outside and the peel, and both of us walk away frustrated.
Well, you just answered your own question, which, by the way, happens all the time when you listen well and you listen to understand. So you just said, well, if I just would ask, tell me more, I would get more of the root cause. So there's your answer, Ron. It's like we rush to solving rather than, I call it a slow down to speed up. So I was a field hockey player in my early athletic days, and I played pretty competitively. And I coached when I was at the University of Pennsylvania as a grad student. And I was a really good field hockey player, but I was not fast. I had stick work and I could do other things. When I coached the women on the Penn team, they were very fast players. They were Division I fast field hockey players. And what I would try to teach them to do is to actually, if they were bolting down the field with the ball, when they hit a defender, I would encourage them to take a hitch step, slow down just a little bit, and then speed up again. Because what would happen if I was defending somebody like that because I'm not as fast, I'd have to adjust to the slowdown. Then by the time they sped up again, they were past me. If they went at one speed, I could catch them because I could cut off the angle. That is incredibly counterintuitive for fast people to do. I don't want to slow down. I can run fast. So when we're really good problem solvers and we're doing it 8 hours a day, and by the way, if from the time we're in elementary school, we're taught to problem solve through college and graduate school, that is a speed we're running at fast. We're not used to slowing down and saying, tell me more before we speed up again to give them the answer. So, and that is incredibly important for speakers because I don't necessarily believe we have to customize our speeches for every audience, but every audience is unique. So I had a former colleague that said to me one time, why are you going over what you're going to say? You've done this so many times, you know it inside and out. I said, I've never done it for this audience. I need to make sure I understand them so that I nuance what I'm saying to their needs, to their perceptions, to their life. It's different if I'm talking to manufacturing versus CEOs. There's a commonality, but there's also some nuance that I want to thread and make sure the audience feels understood because no matter what I say, that's more important, that they feel I get them. And that's true. That's how we customize is understanding why are they bringing me in? What are their hopes for this? What do they think about? And then when I know that, I'm either confirming where I'm going or I'm adjusting in a nuanced way to make sure they feel understood. And then all the stuff you have to say just means so much more.
And that's the conversation you're having with the event host before your
With
speech.
the event host getting inside, the questions are really about what would the audience think the problem is? What do you think the problem is? What are you hoping to gain out of this so that you're deeply understanding them as a unique entity, even though there's so many commonalities in what teams feel, people believe. It's that's when you understand that, you become much more powerful in how, and I believe in how we speak. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask another crazy question because a lot of speakers, a lot of event hosts, I should say, ask you to fill out an application or an abstract before they will even talk to you.
Hmm.
So if listening is audible words that a
Hmm.
person hears, reading is written words that you can interpret the same way. How does
Hmm.
someone read to understand? Do you see what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, because sometimes you're not able to talk to the person, but you can
Yeah.
go to their website, you can pull off these different things that
Yeah.
you understand their audience a little bit more. And
Yeah.
this may not
Yeah.
be your area, but it was just something that came to my mind. Like, wait, these two things are kind of the same. And it's a skill that if I can't talk to the person, I got to find an alternative. How do I
Yeah.
do that?
And again, I think that's exact. You can't know everything, but you can get a picture. And when you write this, when you write the abstract, it can be, these are the areas that I, focus and we move. But and I'm also want to understand the needs of your audience to make sure that the nuanced messaging is there. So you can put some of that in your language, as well as build your language around what you think from their public persona. What we do know is that there's more going on below the surface always, right? We always know there's another story because it's my mother's story once again. It's like pretty on the outside, loving, warm, kind, funny, and deeply sad that never went away. So we just need to understand there's more to that story, and our job is at whatever point we can get to it to understand it more. But that's a good bridge to start, and it will make you differentiate, I believe. Yeah.
If you had to give us a framework, I know you gave us the five different steps of listening earlier. Um, are there any, right? Are there any other, because after you mentioned active listening, you talked about how the listener is in control of the conversation in reality, if done properly, right? Are there frameworks around that a person can say, okay, this, I don't have to listen to respond. I don't, even though I'm in control of this, I don't need to interrogate people. I heard you say
Yeah.
that earlier.
Yep.
How do we go further, for lack of better words, down the listening path?
Okay, so well, I appreciate that, and that's what you're seeing behind me, the path. And so first of all, I think that listening should be simple. That doesn't mean it's easy. Simple and easy are two different things, right? Simple is how basic can we make it, and easy is whether it just comes naturally. We have a lot of history to overcome to learn how to listen to understand.
Mhm.
So, but simple. So these are the three steps of listening. And I'm going to give you the one of the tools that I think will help the speakers here. So the three steps as the listener is, and again, I want to take you back into the woods. Imagine you're hiking in the woods, that you're traveling the path to understanding. And when I said you're listening, you're always listening to a story. So your job, the first step in listening is to gather the story. The speaker, the host says, Ron, I want you to come and speak for us. All right, boom, you're in the middle of a story. Now gather it. What's the real story underneath that? Why did they look for you? What are they looking for? What do they want the outcomes to be? You got to get you got to travel the path to get the story. So step one is gather. There's tools that we give to gather the story. I'll circle back in a minute with one powerful one. Okay, there's three tools to gather the story. The problem is most people think they're done after they gather the story. Oh, I got the story, I'm good, right? Here, like you just said, somebody says I solved I tried what you told me, it didn't work. You're like, okay, I'm done, I'm ready to solve. Well, we have to make sure that we understand the story. That's step two. So how do you understand? Well, you have to make sure that what was said is, you shine a light on it so that the speaker knows that you heard what they wanted you to hear. You've been doing that throughout this conversation with me. You've been trying to summarize what we just talked about, which is a really helpful thing. So summarizing, I always say, when it's late in the woods, you can't see because it's dark. When it's late in the conversation, the speaker has no idea what you heard. They're in the dark. You need to shine a light on what you heard so they can see it. So that is different than just reflecting pieces of it. It's really being able to tell the story back to the person. All right. So that's part of understanding. The other part is the reality is we're human and our brains are the enemy. So we're going to contaminate the story. No matter how hard we try, our own thoughts and feelings will contaminate the story. So we have to remove the contamination in order to make sure we understand the story. And part of that is just affirming with the person that you get them before you finish listening. So those are step one is gather. Step two is understand and confirm understanding. Okay. And then the third is discovering what the meaning is. So when you are with a customer, what's the meaning of that story? Oh, you want to, the meaning might be for the event planner. You want to make sure that everybody can take away one key takeaway that they can apply, right? Around whatever your topic is. When you're able to say, is that's the insight, that's what I believe you want, and the person goes, yeah, that's what we want, home run. Right? Home run. When you bring the value forward that the person's looking for you to bring, if you articulate it, your chances of getting that gig go up a huge amount because now they believe you understand them. So it's gather, understand, and discover the meaning. Those are the three steps. The hardest part for people seems to be the gathering because they don't know that they even need to do that before they solve. So I can give the speakers that we're talking to today a tool if it's helpful on how to gather, which is around questioning, but I'll pause there.
No, keep going.
Oh, all right, keep going. All right, so this is so as you talked about being the guide, when you gather the story, and there's one of the primary tools that we give in that three-step framework is called a compass. How do you guide the speaker, point them in the right direction to tell their story in a way you can understand? There's 6 questions that the best listeners, 10% of people in the world know how to listen, only 10%. So 90 of us are terrible, 90% of us. They are journalists and therapists. Those are the best listeners by trade. Okay, it doesn't mean every therapist is a good listener, but by trade. And here are the 6 questions that they primarily use. So I'm going to go through them. The first one is, take me back to the beginning. So when you're listening to a story, it's like a movie. It follows the same story path. You can kind of see it behind me: beginning, struggle, tipping point, new beginning. Movies and books follow this path. It's the Hollywood way. What happens when you're dropped in the middle of a movie? 20 minutes late, you're confused, you're uncertain, you don't know who the characters are, you don't know what's going on. When we're listening, that's happening all the time because people are terrible storytellers. They start in the middle of the movie and we don't know it. So saying, take me back to the beginning, make sure you get the beginning. So the person comes to you and says, I tried this, blah, 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 and it didn't work. All right. Could you take me back to the beginning? Tell me more. What happened? Okay, boom. Now you're in the beginning of the story. So that's the first question. The second question is, then what happened, which is what I just mentioned. The third question is, how did that make you feel? Now, most of us aren't used to asking about emotions, particularly in business, but stories have 2 parts of the narrative, facts and feelings. And when you're listening as the guide, you need to get both. So take me back to the beginning, then what happened? How did that make you feel? The one you mentioned, very powerful question, tell me more. All right. And then, ready for this? One of the 6 is, right? So when we're listening well, we're asking the teller, the speaker, we're nodding them along. That's another indication of tell me more. So that's question 5. And the 6th question is, it sounds like you felt, and then you fill in the blank. So you're the person that comes and says, I tried this and it didn't work. Take me back. Well, how did that make you feel? Well, then what happened? Oh, it sounds like you felt really frustrated. Tell me more. Boom. Now in 3 minutes, you probably have the full narrative, and now you know which problem you're solving.
That is incredible. And I never knew where I learned that from, because I was taught that in a sales training.
Which one? The tell me more or all of those?
It's called the ladder. It's called the sales ladder. from
Ah,
it was a company called Miller Hyman
yeah,
Professional Selling
sure.
Skills, PSS.
Yep,
And it
yep.
used to be called Achieve Global, but that's the selling framework like that I learned 15 years ago, and I still use it today.
And the
Um,
selling framework is what, Ron? Like, describe it to me.
so basically, it is they call it the ladder or the steps,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And you start very broad with the broad
Mm-hmm.
question to get the bigger picture, and
Uh-huh.
then you ask confirming questions, and
Yep,
then you restate what you heard,
yep.
right? And then you in selling, you would say you would ask for a confirmation that the problem exists,
Okay.
right? Like, what's the status of this now? Is this worth you changing, right?
Yeah,
I heard you say this. Is this really the thing, right? You're
yeah.
really confirming. And then if they say, yeah, it is, and then you say, okay, well, what are the outcomes of doing this? If you keep going down this way, what happens,
Right, right. What are the
right?
consequences? Yeah,
Exactly. And then when they say, well, it would be like this, that until they tell you the consequences,
yeah.
you can't talk about that. You can't even acknowledge that you can solve the problem.
Right. You slow down, don't solve the problem. So the difference, so that's great. And that's pretty close, except for it's still very much, I'm here to fix you.
Yeah,
And
because we're selling.
we're selling. But people don't like to be sold to.
Right.
People don't like to be sold to. So what the difference is, just to nuance that, is to say, I'm going to understand you, your story, and your business, both the feelings and the facts, to help discover things that you don't even know exist, not just the things you do know exist. See, that's the difference when you don't focus on one element, which is what I get it, and I'm familiar with Sandler and those different and the submarine and all the same things, and it's really helpful to just know that you got to stay back here before you go out here. But in today's world, to personalize that and to help people feel deeply understood about what's going on and helping them bring things to the surface they don't even know exist, both on a human level and a problem level, it changes the dynamic so that it doesn't feel like a sales process.
Gotcha. So let me iterate on that a bit because I think that this may be helpful. This will help out for me. Once I get to that confirming that they have the issue, maybe I should just put it in the parking lot and just let it sit there and then say, is there anything else? Right. And then they may open up a whole new can of worms. And I still haven't solved the problem. I'm still just listening to what they're dealing with and then walk them up those steps through those questions and then put it in the parking lot and then ask them again, is there anything else? And they're
Hmm.
like, no, I think that that's it. Okay. Well, here's what I heard. I heard that you want to solve this problem and you want
Yes,
to solve
yes.
that problem.
You're shining the
And
flashlight. Yep. Yeah.
but instead of jumping in to respond, I should just put it in the parking lot
Yeah,
and
that's
then
right.
go get the cars later, like valet those until later on.
Well, so Einstein has a quote. If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes understanding it and 5 minutes solving it. So that's listening isn't about being quiet and just being patient while other people talk. It's a dialogue, it's an exchange. We've been in an exchange today. That's what it's supposed to look like. If we're talking sales, I think it's 55-45 roughly, that the person should be listening 40, like speaking 45% as the listener and 55 the speaker. That's a lot different than people think of that 80-20 rule. Those are when most sales convert, when there's a dialogue. The difference is I'm dialoguing to get your story, not dialoguing to sell. That's the difference. Now, the one thing I just want to highlight again about what you're talking about, you're focused on the problem, and it's more about the story, Ron. It's broader than just solving their problem. It's about let me understand what your story is, not just labeling it a problem, because that's how people feel diagnosed a little bit versus heard or understood, especially in relationships. I can help you solve your problem. No, I want you to understand me, not just my problem. And by the way, let me say something because I'm having a moment. The words I understand have very little to do with anybody feeling understood. So take that out of your, not you personally, but take that out of your vernacular. If you say to the customer or the client or the speaker or the event planner, yeah, I understand, that to me says, no, you don't. Show people you understand. Tell them what you understand. Don't tell them you understand. Tell them what you understand. Big difference.
That's interesting. So I used to work for a big insurance company, and we did 8 weeks of this training,
Yeah.
right? And they gave me a T-shirt at the end. It was a navy blue T-shirt because you had to give people gifts at the end, and you had like a secret Santa type of thing. But it wasn't
Nice.
Christmas; it was in the
Yeah.
summertime, right?
Fun.
And they gave me a navy blue shirt that says "Help me to understand," right?
Wow.
And because that was my go-to, right?
Nice.
Whenever someone would say something and they would get through it, I would say, okay, cool. So help me understand a little bit more. And they would go further because I had to get them beyond that little onion peel, right? And then as they kept going, but it was so funny because everybody else was trying out different ones. I'm like, no, I got one that works. Help me understand. And I just used the one that works for me. And they made it into a joke. They gave me a jersey.
So now, so you're in the office, right? And somebody comes in and says, I tried something. Take me back, help me understand. Tell me more. Tell me
Yeah,
more.
no, it's
And
interesting that I didn't realize that's what I was learning. Like all of this stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, like this makes sense now. Now that you put it in perspective,
yeah.
you've
Well,
reframed it for me, which is good.
yeah, and remember, we're in the 21st century, and people don't like to be sold to or to be a problem that's solved. So it's really important. I try to I don't tell anybody anything until I deeply understand what they're telling themselves first, so that I know that story, so I earn the right. And by the way, a lot of people solve their own problems because when you talk through somebody, well, I tried it this way or that way, and then you go, oh, well, come to think of it, I didn't push that button. You said to push that button, and then maybe they go try to push that button and it works. A lot of problems get solved because you just help guide them to their own understanding. When you help the customer, your spouse, somebody else figure their own stuff out, they feel more empowered than when you're just saying, I can fix it, I can fix it.
No, I think that this started off talking about business, but it shows how business and personal skills are the same. Because even though we say, "Oh, I'm B2B or I'm B2C," no, you're P2P. You're person to person,
That's it.
and
It's right. That's right.
so if you don't work
P
on
to
those
P.
personal skills, how do you how do you connect with the event planner? How do you make them feel heard and understood? How do you really hear and understand them? Not make them feel, but actually do it. You don't want to technique them um, into hiring you. How do you really understand what the problem is? That way, you don't get offended if they don't hire you, right? Because now you're like, oh, I understand why they didn't hire me.
That's right. And that's so important what you said, because it's not for show. It's the genuine meaning of I understand them. And it's very powerful. It earns you the right, because here's the thing, even if you have the solution, people don't like to be told what to do. And telling rarely works. And ironically, one of the first things we're told in life, ready, is to listen. Yet we're not showing people how to do it or teaching them how to do it. So we're telling that we taught them to tell, we tell them to listen, and we wonder why we fail. It's just not, it's backwards. So we need to put the listening before the speaking, because and this is, so I'll bookend what I said earlier, which is, when as speakers, it's our job to listen first. Even if we never no, never see the audience before we're on stage, the audience matters. They're the client. When the audience feels understood, they'll come with you. And that's the first thing we need to communicate to speakers, our understanding of them, before we tell them what we think is the right way to do something. It's
No,
hard to
I think
listen.
no, it's really hard, and I don't think anyone's complete problems will be solved in these 45 minutes that we've spent, but I think it's getting them closer, and it may awaken the idea that they need to learn more about how to listen, not just for their business, but for their personal relationships overall. Because if you got an argument with your partner at home and then you got to go to a meeting, because you didn't listen over here, it screwed up this whole thing over here. And these things are built in together. So
One of the things, I had a conversation with a client a couple days ago, and I said, the more that somebody disagrees with me, the more that I agree with them. So so we think the way to resolve conflict is to talk about what we disagree about, and in reality, what we should be. So let's agree to disagree. I hate that. Hate it. No, let's agree to understand. I can understand. I can seek to understand what you are upset about, what you disagree with, versus I just disagree. So the more you try to understand somebody that's really disagreeing with you, the less they disagree with you. It's a de-escalator. It is a negotiation skill, Ron. Listening is a negotiation skill. It is the foundation for every aspect of negotiation. If I don't understand who I'm negotiating with, how can I pivot them to want to give up to give me what I need? So that's why it's so important when you're in dichotomous places to make sure you're meeting where the understanding is, not where the disagreement is. And listening is that tool.
I can talk to you for like 2 more hours, but I know we don't have that time. So I'm going to ask you a question I like to ask, which is most people are either introverts or extroverts. It seems like
Mhm.
listening is an introverted skill that extroverts need to learn. Which one are you? Are you an introvert or extrovert?
Well, I'm a classic extrovert, although one of the things that, extroverts care about what people think by nature. And so even though in new situations, I use my superpower to be extroverted. I listen to be able to connect quickly with people. So I, so let me just talk about introversion, extroversion for a second. So his the basic premise of introversion extroversion is, do you get energy from people or don't you? Do they exhaust you or do they energize you? All right, now some of us are somewhere in between. Introverts get tired from people, but when they know people, they look extroverted. That's the reality. With their known small group, they'll look like extroverts. Extroverts by nature just look like they just wheeled around in the world a little more easily. But classically, introversion has not been respected as much as a leadership skill because they're quieter, they may seem not as gregarious, and so forth. Talking kills results. So extroverts can talk too much. Just because you're introverted, though, doesn't mean you're listening. It just means you're holding space better. So your chances go up if you're not talking as much, because talking is a listening inhibitor, but it's not a guarantee because we all suck. 90% of people fail at listening, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault. They haven't been taught. They've been told, not taught. They don't know what good listening looks like. They don't know how to do it. They're in the woods, wandering aimlessly, hoping the speaker can find them to the understanding, and we're terrible storytellers. So we have a communication conundrum, and I am determined to solve that problem by not only teaching adults as we do, and businesses and so forth, and speaking, but also by bringing listening education into classrooms. So that's my greater mission, is why don't we teach kids to do this early so we become adults that know how to listen and speak, because both are important. So how do we gather the story, and then how do we tell a story? Speaking is both those things, and life is all those skills. So we're coming for the kids. So we're launching a classroom program next week for elementary schools.
Tell me about it.
So it's starting out first year, launching third to fifth grade, and it's the story of the listening path. And what we've created is basically a movie of the story of how to listen to understand, chunked into 11 animated lessons. I can see if I can point. That's me back there, animated Christine on the box. I can't point, obviously. So I animated myself. So I teach in the videos the tools and how to use them. And the real heroes of this story are the teachers, who are the implementers. So they utilize all the tools we give them in the classroom. They get sent a surprise. They get a backpack with all the tools for the classroom. So it's the ABCs of listening, the language of listening, and it takes about 12 weeks, 12 to 14 weeks to implement. They're 20-minute lessons, and It's simple to implement. We're going to bring the parents into it. We have caregiver guides that the teachers already built that send home, so we can help bring the skill of listening to the homes while we're bringing it to the classroom. So I am so excited. Yeah.
No, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
I appreciate you taking the time to come on and to share the skill building techniques that we all need, and we could use them forever, in business, out of business,
Hmm.
at age 95, at age
That's
5,
right.
like the
That's
kids that
right.
you're going to be teaching. We can
Yeah.
all go to LTU.
Now, listen to understand, baby. Listen to understand. I'm glad you saw that. I wish I could point. I
Yeah, I
cannot
see
be a
it. I
weather.
see
I
it.
can't be a weather person.
These
LTU
glasses
is
work, man. These
that was
glasses
good.
work.
That was very yeah. So and if it look, I didn't write my book to sell books, but if people want the tools, there's actually we teach organizations up to 12 tools. There's 5 foundational tools for the kids, 6 for the adults. So they're in my book. So the last third of the book, if you want the path and how to do the compass, the flashlight, the water filter, the map, it's all in there. So, if somebody wants help, reach out. I'll talk. We'll set up a call. Let's
No,
change the world.
it's that's a big deal. So I'm gonna pay you probably the most underutilized compliment ever.
Oh, okay.
Most
Ooh.
people here, when they have a conversation, say, "Man, it was great talking to you," right? But I've always had my goal whenever I'm having conversations like this to say, "No, it was great listening to you,"
Oh,
because we
thanks.
never hear that. We never
No.
hear, "Hey, it was great listening to you." Usually, the person who was talking the whole time said, "It was great talking to you." You're like, "Dude, I didn't even get to say anything."
Well, I really look that training stuck with you because I do think I appreciate how even though your brain is in trouble sometimes, your ability to summarize, even to attempt to summarize, to thread, it was really good modeling for what we need to do more of. Could you be better at it? Of course. Look, what's the difference between a weekend athlete and an Olympic athlete? The speed and proficiency with which they can do the skill. You've clearly had some training. Imagine those who haven't. But just that alone, what you showed. So when people watch this, watch you, what you did to thread the conversation. That's a way to see how this works. That's really what'll model it for them and how to engage with event planners.
Wait till I tell my partner Viviana that I am an expert listener. Who cares what she says?
Oh,
I
well, I
mastered
didn't
this
know
thing.
that.
Nope,
Wait a minute.
nope,
She and
nope,
I
nope,
talked.
nope, nope, nope. An expert told me I mastered listening.
All right.
Give me my medal. Give me my
I'm gonna give you you take it to her however you want to. That's cool. I get it. Fighting
give
for
me
your
my
life, right?
give me my medal. I'm going to show it off. Say, look, you who said I don't know how to listen?
That's so funny. That's so funny. That's good. That's good. I like it.
Hey,
Well, I
thanks.
appreciate the opportunity to share my story, Ron. Thank you.
No, thanks for sharing it with us.